You ever work on a project and you feel pretty confident about your pace on it, but there's just one part of the process that always, no matter what you do or how you go about it, always takes longer than you think it should? That's me with level design. My name is Skylar Fox, and this is Project Mycer. For those new here, Project Mycer is an action-adventure superhero game I have been developing for the past couple of years, and while I have spent several videos talking about the base gameplay and combat for the game, very little has been shown about traversal and overall level design. And there's kind of a reason for that. It's been very slow going. In my game, I've managed to optimize the time I spend on character models, animations, and gameplay systems, but the main area that I can never seem to get in a pace that I'm happy with is level design. I spent the past year trying to figure out why this is, and turns out this is an area a lot of indie devs seem to really struggle with. Level design is deceptively complex. For most games, we're running through levels fairly quickly, so much so that it can be easy to underestimate how much work has to go into making them work as well as they do. And while I've made levels in other games before, those games were always lower scope compared to what Project Mycer is. I didn't really do myself any favors making a game that takes place largely in a city environment. Naively enough, I had initially hoped that this kind of environment would be advantageous given how many Unreal Marketplace assets there were for cities. Given just the scope of how many assets I would have to make for this game, I thought it would save me time having some assets that were already made for buildings, concrete, streets, furniture, etc. And it did, to a certain extent. See, one of the obstacles I did not foresee was dealing with the sense of scale and properly snapping those assets in place. When designing levels, you actually don't want the proportions to be all that realistic because it could hinder the game feel. You want everything to feel like it's the right size rather than actually being accurate to real life. One thing that you may not notice until it's pointed out to you is how doorways in most video games are comically large, at least double the size of the player character. It's technically inaccurate scaling, but it feels right during gameplay. So oftentimes, I would have to rescale these marketplace assets to the game's camera and how the player controls. And that can be tedious, especially when dealing with assets that have differing pivot points. Additionally, this also made snapping assets to the correct position a massive pain. Placing wall or floor assets has cost me a lot more time than I'd like to admit, especially because Unreal Engine's snapping tools leave much to be desired. Unreal has a method to snap between an asset's vertices, which theoretically should save time, but that gets buggy really fast when there are a lot of assets in the camera's view. This cost me so much time, in fact, that I actually caved and bought a plugin called Level Design Assistant. And while it certainly helped in some scenarios with placing down assets, and I don't necessarily regret getting it, it didn't really speed up my workflow as much as I was hoping it would. Levels were still taking an incredibly long time to make. Now, I technically got ahead of myself a little bit talking about placing down marketplace art assets because level design doesn't actually start with art assets, despite the fact that most of what trends on YouTube when you look up level design would make you think exactly that. Levels should start with a basic blockout first, as the first priority is to design a level that feels good to move through as the player. So surely this part of the process would be something I could work through on a pace I feel confident in, right? With our protagonist, the Masked Guardian, he is able to run and roll into a sprint, he can leap very high, he can air dash, grab onto ledges, swing on poles, ride down zip lines, and even slide down grind rails. These are all fun mechanics to design and play around with, but then comes the challenge of actually utilizing these movesets in the level in a way that makes sense. And I have found this to be more challenging than I initially thought. For example, with grind rails, where would I have opportunities for the player to actually do this? There are certainly several games that have grind rails, but many of the examples I can think of have them placed in a way that's very video gamey, for lack of a better term. Like, you play through a Sonic game, and the cities are clearly designed more so to be a playground for Sonic's moveset rather than a location anyone could conceivably live in. Grind rails in those games are typically just placed anywhere, suspended in the air. But for my game, which has more of a narrative focus and I'd like the world to be at least a little bit more grounded than that, I'm struggling to think of ways to design the level in a way not just to make it fun, but to have it make sense within the world. And in trying to brainstorm ways to go about this, I inevitably take several hours just sitting there thinking before placing down what would ultimately end up being 5 seconds of gameplay worth of a level at most. When working on the tutorial area for one of the main cities of the game, I had initially expected it would take me a week, maybe 2, to make a basic blockout, and that time turned out to be more like 4 months. And given that it took me less than a month to create the basic combat system for the player, didn't feel too great. And not gonna lie, this problem has definitely hindered some of my confidence in how much longer this project will likely end up taking, especially since I'm developing this during my free time while I'm still working full time. I don't know, was there anything I could do to help speed up this process? I was hoping by the time that I'd make a video about this, I'd have some kind of really insightful answer, but to be honest, I'm not sure I do. I spent a good chunk of time researching level design principles, watching GDC talks, following industry professionals like Steve Lee's channel, which I highly recommend, and while my understanding of level design principles has improved, I still feel that the pace at which I create levels has largely remained unchanged. I think to a certain extent, I just kinda have to accept that level design is just a long process, and there's only so much I can reasonably do to try to optimize my time before there's just not much more time that can be saved. Although having said that, I do think that I am slowly getting a little bit better with my pace here. One aspect of the process that I feel I can definitely improve at is overcoming the blank canvas problem, and I just need to learn to stop overthinking things and just start designing. In the end, it probably is better to just create something and have to redo 90% of what was made, rather than just sitting there and wasting too much time overthinking everything. But that's where things are at with Project Mycer, and it's why it's been difficult to show substantial updates that show a lot of visual progress. If there's any other game devs, indie or otherwise, who are watching this, let me know what you all think of level design. Is this something that you guys struggle just as much as me, or do you guys manage to work through it at a pretty decent pace? I'd love to hear from y'all. And I'd just like to thank everyone for watching this video. If you'd like to continue following the development of Project Mycer, you can do so by subscribing to this channel so you get notified of the next video when it drops. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Take care.